in Across the Fence, the safety of our food. We have important information for growers and consumers about the new federal Food Safety Modernization Act. Good afternoon and thanks for joining us. I'm Judy Simpson. The Food Safety Modernization Act is considered our country's most sweeping food safety reform in 70 years. But just what does the act do and how might it affect Vermont's produce and fruit growers? Well, to find out more, we've called on two Vermont experts in the food safety arena. Joining me are Ginger Nickerson of UVM Extension's Center for Sustainable Agriculture and Abby Willard of the Vermont Agency of Agriculture, Food and Markets. Thanks so much for being with us. Now, this is really an important topic. Especially for Vermont's food growers and processors. So what exactly is the Food Safety Modernization Act?
Good morning. Thank you. So the Food Safety Modernization Act, or FSMA, was a law passed by Congress in 2011 giving the Food and Drug Administration, or FDA, the authority to regulate food products. And it specifically was a food safety law since 1938 that's received great reform and looking at preventing food safety problems, detecting and responding to food safety issues, and improving the safety of imported food. So in Vermont, we're paying particular attention to the produce rule as well as the preventive controls rule. So the produce rule regulates produce or raw agricultural products, and the preventive control rule regulates products that is processed for human consumption, either on farm or at food hubs. So the rules are in their proposed state, and the federal comment period ends on November 15th, and we expect to have a final rule by June of 2015.
So this is still very much a work in progress.
Yes.
And so why is this an issue now, and where have the food safety concerns come from?
So essentially, as Abby was saying, and as you mentioned, the food safety laws have not been overhauled since 1938. So it's time to re-examine these things because our food system's really changed. And it's very important for people to know that the incidence of foodborne illnesses associated with whole fresh produce and is a very small percentage of foodborne safety illnesses. It's only about 1% of the entire set of illnesses associated with food that folks eat. But as many people know, both the meat industry and the dairy industry have had hygiene and sanitation regulation in place since the 30s, but there have never been regulations in place for produce growers or food processors, or at least not the same type for food processors or for importers. So what this rule is doing is that it's giving the FDA new powers to take a preventive stance rather than a reactive stance. And in terms of produce, we have been seeing a slight increase because there have been some changes in the food system. Since the 30s, it's more consolidated, more industrialized, and people are actually eating more fresh produce than they used to eat, as we can see with the salad bars.
Yeah, exactly. So what are some of the major parts of the rules that will affect Vermont?
So first off, I think it's important to recognize that the Agency of Agriculture, Extension, consumers, producers, and processors are all supportive of a food safety program and system in the state and in the country. We know that food safety sort of is opportunity for market access. It protects our quality reputation in Vermont. It is associated with our brand and is building consumer confidence. So we're open to a food safety program. We just want to be a part of one that fits our scale of production here in Vermont and New England. And so some of the concerns that we're facing is that the FSMA doesn't have, it's considered an unfunded mandate. So there's not funding for FDA to implement the program or for individual states to develop their own food safety program, which is concerning. There's a challenge around a regulatory program that doesn't have education, technical assistance, and compliance prior to regulation, which for the states, we'd really love to see a program that looks at educating producers and processors prior to requiring them to be in compliance. We're also hoping that there's a role for states to play. There's a lack of clarity at this point in the FSMA proposed rules as to how FDA and individual states will collaborate. And we'd love to be able to see state staff on the ground working with producers, providing education and technical assistance prior to enforcement, and then maybe even being part of that regulatory program.
Which would be important too, because Vermont farms are very different from farms out west or, down south.
Right. We all have different issues.
How will this impact Vermont farms, do you think?
So there are 5 parts to the rule, and the 2 parts that are most likely to affect Vermont producers and processors are the produce growing standards and the preventive controls for human food. And farmers who grow, harvest, pack, or hold produce might be covered under the produce rules, and either growers or processors who operate facilities that manufacture, process, pack, or hold food that's value added or processed in some ways might be covered under the preventive controls for human food rule. And most farmers and processors are already doing most of the practices that are being proposed under these proposed rules.
Right.
However, there are a few that, as Abby said, that we have some concerns about, that they're going to be more challenging for our climate and for the kind of small-scale diversified operations that we have here in Vermont. In particular, in terms of produce growing, one of the issues is that there's a recommendation for pretty frequent testing of water if you're irrigating from surface waters. And so it's the frequency of the water testing that we're concerned with. Another aspect is that there is a proposal that there be a 9-month interval between having raw manure applied to fields where you might be harvesting produce, such as sweet corn, and when that crop is harvested. And that's a much longer window than we currently have.
That just won't work for our farms.
Yeah, it just won't work for our farms, and it won't work for our climate here in Vermont. And then another issue is that they have, what they've tried to do to make the rule scale appropriate is to have exemptions based on the level of gross sales that farms do. But right now, the definition of food is based on all food that a farm sells, whether it's human or animal food. So if you're a dairy farm and you have a pumpkin patch or a you-pick berry patch, and most of your gross sales are coming from your raw milk, and only a very small percentage is coming from your pumpkin sales, you might still be covered by these rules. And so we would like to see the definition for gross food sales only be for produce. Similarly, it could potentially dissolve the pasteurized milk ordinance. And there are some places in the rules where there are some conflicts with the National Organic Program standards. And because we have so many certified organic farms in Vermont, that's something else that we're concerned about.
These are big deals.
They are big deals.
That's a lot of work.
They are big deals. And as Abby said, our food is, most of our farmers are following the majority of the proposed standards in the rules. Produce is very safe. Our processed food is very safe, but these things could affect our businesses.
It's kind of sad because it's almost as if, if it's not broken, don't fix it. Kind of, at least for Vermont when it comes to the smaller scale of what we're doing. So Abby, how are there concerns for consumers as well?
Yeah, it's a good point. I think there's an opportunity for consumers to also be concerned. So I think because there's such an interest and motivation around community-based agriculture in Vermont, and people are very comfortable with this arrangement of buying from their neighbors and shopping at farmers markets and sort of feeling very close to their food supply, my concern is that consumers are feeling this reduced access could come of local food as potentially businesses go out of production and small farms choose that to meet a food safety standard of this bar would be too difficult for them, and so they no longer will produce certain foods. That there's an increased food cost associated with local product as producers or processors are passing on some of these increased record keeping or infrastructure improvement needs, so seeing local food cost more. The inability for customers to access local food, again, if we see a reduction in the amount of local food produced in the state or certain foods not being available at the same venues that we were accustomed to, sort of a change in this community-based agriculture, I think, is some anticipated concerns from our consumers.
And Ginger, what's important to be aware of right now regarding the Act?
In terms...
Well, people can, they're asked public comment, right?
Right, yeah. So the most important thing is to remember it's November 15th that you have to get your comments in by. And we would love to see as many people comment as possible because volume counts. We saw when the national organic standards changed back, I think, in 97, 98, that volume of comments that we had from consumers and producers really had an impact. And so there's the opportunity really for people's voices to be heard. So we want as many people as possible to comment.
So let's take a look at that
November
website
15th.
Again so people know where to go. So they just can register online or by mail, right?
Yep. So if you go online to www.regulations.gov, that will take you to the Federal Register docket. And if you want to write in your comments, you can do that by mail, and the address is up on the screen. If you go to the FDA website, they will also give you information, and so would the Agency of Agriculture website, about how to mail in comments. The important thing is that, educate yourself about the rules.
And to find out more information, I think there's also another website that we can put up for folks to find out about that. But go ahead, find out about the rules.
Educate yourself about the rules. Don't feel overwhelmed. You can just comment on one rule. If you just want to comment on manure spreading, that's totally fine. You don't have to comment about everything. For more information, you can go to the Center for Sustainable Agriculture's website. We have lots of resources on there, including recorded webinars and information about the NSAC, the National Sustainable Agriculture Coalition, has great information. You can go to the FDA website, and also the Agency of Agriculture's website will give you contact information if you want to call and speak to somebody some more about this.
And Abby, what makes for a strong comment?
So that's a great question. We've been wanting to ensure that we see a volume of comments get submitted, but also high quality comments, so that FDA will actually really seriously consider the recommendations that come. So we know that a strong comment would be submission of particular concerns that your operation, whether it's a farm or a processor, or even if you were a concerned consumer, would be faced with by some of the suggested proposed changes in FSMA, describing how FSMA's program could be adjusted, so offering a meaningful alternative so that it's not just a complaint but actually something that you're proposing to change that could be helpful suggestion. Being specific, recommending something about the rules that be changed that would make all the difference for your operation. Recognizing that these will be comments on the federal docket that will be the permanent public record, so people are aware of that commitment that they're making. But also, as Ginger said, this is their chance to comment. So the public comment period being open until November 15th is a significant opportunity for people to share things that they like about the rule, that they're supportive of, and pieces that they may also be challenged by, and encouraging them to sort of submit meaningful suggestions for how they'd like to see an alternate approach by FDA. And we know that that volume of high-quality comments will make a difference, as it did in the review of the National Organic Standards.
We have about a minute left, so what's next for the Food Safety Modernization Act after November 15th?
Good question.
So extension has been, UVM extension has been working really closely with the extensions in the other 5 New England states on developing educational programming so that our food growers and processors are aware of these rules and how they might impact them. and how to prepare for them if your business is going to be affected by them. So you can stay tuned to UVM Extension to find if you're a grower or processor to learn about educational opportunities.
And the Agency of Agriculture will be working with our legislature to sort of authorize legislative authority for the state to regulate produce, which is not an authority that we currently have. So that'll be a priority this next legislative session. Our hope is that we can convince Congress as well as FDA to do a second draft rule of the Food Safety Modernization Act, giving FDA time to incorporate the volume of comments that they'll receive across the country, put out a second draft rule for everyone to review and comment on again, and recognize that we'll be working across the country with our colleagues of Departments of Agriculture and Health on making these rules something that we can all work with.
Well, Abby, Ginger, thank you so much for joining me today. That's our program for today. I'm Judy Simpson. We'll see you again next time on Across the Fence.
For a video copy of today's program, call toll-free 1-888-ATF-3430. Across the Fence is brought to you as a public service by University of Vermont Extension and WCAX-TV.